Kathy Kelly, now married, states that during her time as CEO, she had notified USAG about sexual abuse within the organization, but that little was done to address the issue. Years after retiring, she would state that she tried to enact national policies to protect children, which included publishing names of terminated members in the USA Gymnastics magazine. In one instance, records show complaints about a coach named Bill McCabe who had made sexual suggestive comments about children. Concerned parents brought it up to Kathy, who would later state that USAG couldn't investigate him. This was because USAG had a rule that a written complaint from a victim or victim's parents had to be in place in order to investigate it. "I would tell him to get me a letter from the parent," said Kathy Kelly. "We just simply did not have the information that we needed." After Kathy Kelly left her position, Bob Colarossi took her place. Within months of joining as CEO, he found that the organization had a problem. Worried about USAG's lack of basic sex abuse prevention measures, like Kathy Kelly had stated, he decided to email the U.S. Olympic Committee, also known as the USOC. "This is not an issue that can be washed away," Colarossi wrote to the committee, including current President Bill Hybel, who served from 1996 to 1999. He would also attach future CEO Scott Blackmun, who would serve from 2010 to 2018. The USOC can either position itself as a leader in the protection of young athletes, or it can wait until it's forced to deal with the problem under much more difficult circumstances. Although Colarossi tried to address the problem, the USOC didn't listen. Most sports organizations didn't have policies on sexual harassment or sexual abuse, said Catherine Reith, former Assistant Executive Director of Women's Sports Foundation. Major national organizations haven't dealt with the coach-athlete relationship because people didn't want to talk about it, leaving the athlete to basically feel alone. Bob Colarossi's claim was regarding the Ted Stevens Olympic and Amateur Sports Act. This act, that prevented coaches from being banned before a hearing to prove there was any misconduct, would allow many of USAG predators to continue coaching after complaints came out. When Bob tried to ban coaches who did convict sex crimes, a volunteer from the USOC came back after him, saying that this was not allowed since they didn't provide a hearing. Nothing in the Ted Stevens Act prohibits investigators of secondhand allegations of abuse, but the law does require Olympic governing bodies given a fair notice, due process, and a hearing to anyone it wants to ban, requirements that some youth-serving organizations do not need to adhere to before expelling an adult suspected of abuse. Bob was furious, since he had physical evidence to ban the coaches, since the USOC was not monitoring these complaints. I turned to Bill Hybel, and I said, "If you want to get into a conversation about sexual misconduct in the sport in front of God, the country, and the media with a national governing body that is the most voracious defender of its athletes, bring it on. But it ain't going to be pretty, and you're not going to want to pick the newspaper up the next day," Colarossi said. Colarossi said that not long after he sent the letter, Hybel urged Colarossi to give in to the committee's demands. Years later, Hybel would deny recognizing the depth of this problem. Backman would also state in 2010 that he couldn't recall if the 1999 letter caused discussion with the USOC to change its tactics or not. But the problem was there, and it was clearly not going away. And although there was the Ted Stevens Act to provide a fair ban, the process would take months and still risk children being hurt. Whatever they did, the USOC wouldn't allow a way to rid of banned coach until a hearing was placed. In 2002, while Colarossi was still CEO, one coach, Stephen Elliott, was charged for touching and sexually harassing two gymnasts. He would plead guilty to tampering with the peephole in a hotel room for his 2 athletes while at a traveling meet. USA Gymnastics sought to ban Elliott, but the process took a year as Elliott requested a hearing and appealed USA Gymnastics' initial decision to terminate his membership. Elliott was ultimately banned in 2003. Instead of banning him from working with kids for being a predator, they just decided to put Elliott on a 3-year probation. But this wouldn't be the only time that justice wasn't served in USAG's part. John Wesley Martis, who had complaints filed in 2004 for molesting children, would have no consequences. In an email sent out to USAG, the subject was titled, "We have another one," making it sound like it was a joke for how often complaints came in against coaches being inappropriate with gymnasts. In 2005, he would be convicted as a child molester. Though USAG banned him, they didn't put his name on the ban list, leaving parents unaware of his termination. In 2006, William McCabe would make headlines again for his sexual abuse. In one document, it discussed how he secretly videotaped gymnasts undressing in the locker room of the gym. The lawsuit was filed anonymously by a former female student whom McCabe videotaped and sent sexually suggestive messages online when she was only 11. McCabe would plead guilty and be convicted in 2006 for his wrongdoings. In 2006, a lawsuit would be filed against USAG for one of those women who were previously abused by McCabe. The lawsuit claimed that USAG was negligent since they had filed a report on McCabe after 4 complaints had been received by the organization. USA Gymnastics at the time was fighting the suit, denying responsibility for the alleged criminal acts of others. When the lawsuit was being filed, many files were released, which included 54 coaches from 1996 to 2006 who had been accused of sexual abuse with minors. Some of those files were later redacted. Bob Colorasi's 1999 letter was also released, showing the world once and for all that USAG's policies and procedures put medals and sponsorships ahead of the safety of its members' athletes. Brian Cornell, attorney in charge of the lawsuit, said, "The failure at all levels of the organization to protect its athletes against child molesting members, coaches required nothing less than a mandatory reporting requirement for anyone involved in the sport. The files were released by a judge because of a lengthy court battle waged by the Indianapolis Star." USAG again refused to comment on the lawsuit. In 2006, USA Gymnastics wrote the USOC allowed it to implement a compromise policy in which it could immediately ban a member convicted of a sex crime while offering the opportunity for a phone hearing. But why did it have to take so long if so many people had already gotten away with this abuse? There are a handful of cases in which lenient punishments from USA Gymnastics or the appeal process mandated by the USOC may have left children at risk. In 1997, USA Gymnastics put local coach James Bell on probation after investigation found a pattern of inappropriate touching of students by Bell. Between 2001 and 2003, Bell molested 3 of his gymnastics students at a Rhode Island YMCA, according to prosecutors there. Bell was arrested in August of 2003 and later fled the state. USA Gymnastics didn't ban Bell until January of 2007, after sending him a letter offering him the chance to request a hearing. The FBI located Bell in 2015, and he pleaded guilty to the charges. "I can't fix what happened before I arrived here. I can only address what's happened since 2010, Scott Blackman recalls, referring to the fact that he left in the early 2000s and returned as CEO in 2010. "I actually think the USOC has been incredibly proactive in the last 7 years, said Blackman. It's questionable if things have gotten better, though, as Blackman refers to the new organization called Safe Sport, an organization that is debatably working to fight change.